Hi, everyone. That was such great music. I was dancing a little bit. I don't know if you saw, but welcome to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. We're here, the Hella Complicated panel. And as you come in, as you join us, please go ahead and read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. And you can enter to win a free visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. And you can find the link to the entry form in the chat as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Anna Lapera, and I'm a middle grade author of the book Manny Semilla Finds Her Quetzal Voice, and which just came out in March. But I'm super, super excited to be here with three amazing authors that are joining us here today. So I am actually going to let them introduce themselves very briefly with their name and also the title of their latest books. So take it away. Let's start with Josh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Galarza, and I'm a YA author. And my debut is The Great Cool Ranch Dorito in the Sky, and it just came out in July.
Yay. I'm Patrick Flores Scott. I'm a YA author as well. My third book, No Going Back, came out in April.
Hi, and my name is Elvira Gonzalez, and the title of my book is Hurdles in the Dark, and mine came out in May, so also not long ago.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here that I get to ask you all questions about your wonderful books. So let's start with just generally talking about young adult fiction. Young adult fiction often shows teens having to step up to the plate amidst seemingly insurmountable adversity and obstacles. Specifically in Hurdles in the Dark and No Going Back, our protagonists struggle and fight to break cycles of violence from within their homes, larger communities, and networks. In The Great Cool Ranch Dorito in the Sky, our protagonist, Brett, who is no stranger to loss, struggles to keep it together as his loving adoptive mother suffers from failing health. Given the major personal and global obstacles that young people today face, how important was it for each of you to show teens overcoming adversity in their own way and maybe even stumbling along the way? So Patrick, for Antonio, the stakes are high and immediate, right? Because if he missteps in any sort of way, he's going back to the youth detention center. I would love to start with you, Patrick.
Yeah, Antonio's on parole, and you get his conditions of parole at the very beginning as a list, and he breaks them one by one throughout his first weekend back. And so the stakes are really high, but yeah, given what young people are going through, I think it is kind of what we do as young adult authors, is put kids in trouble and then and then watch them get out of it. But the stumbles along the way, I think, are the really important aspect of that whole thing, because that's where kids see themselves. They see themselves in the stumbles along the way, and they see themselves in the successes, or in the effort and the struggle to overcome those stumbles and the things that get in their way. So yeah, in this book, I put in like more of those obstacles than I've ever put into a novel before, but also more potential relationships of people who can help him out of those struggles. And so hopefully in that, kids see the struggles, they see the stumbles, but they maybe think about those helpers they might have in their lives that they can latch on to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Elvira, can we move on to you next?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, Patrick, that's a great answer. I feel the same about my book. And my book is a nonfiction. So, I'm writing about my personal experiences growing up in a town called Laredo, Texas. And I really wanted to show the real life experiences that I had to overcome. And, as the title is called Hurdles in the Dark, there was definitely a lot of hurdles along the way. And I just really wanted to portray that experience. And, in the human experience, we constantly have hurdles, and that's the unfortunate thing. But I think for me that I really want readers to get that it's okay to fall. It's okay to fail. And I think something about falling and getting up definitely built resilience in me. And I still see that to this day when I face hurdles, that helps me. So yeah, I think that was really important for me to add that in the book, and just having a real life experience, but also letting young people know that it's okay to fail, whether that's over a hurdle or in real life. I definitely think that builds character along the way.
Yeah, awesome. No, I love that. I love both those answers. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm just thinking as a teacher, like how much, just how important it is to teach kids that sometimes, quote unquote, failing or stumbling, that it's all part of like strengthening who they're going to become. So I really appreciate that answer. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I love those answers. And I would just build on it maybe to say too, that one of the most important lessons that I was trying to impart in this book is that not only is it okay to stumble and fail, it's also okay and even important to practice getting comfortable asking for help.
Yeah.
And that's a major part of my protagonist story, that our mistakes don't have to define us, that we can seek help from people around us. And that, like, anyone who makes terrible mistakes, because I certainly have made plenty in my life, though you can actually come back from that, right? If you're willing to work hard on yourself, you're willing to learn, you're willing to change, if you're willing to seek forgiveness as needed. So I think that's a really important aspect of stories where we see people stumble and fall, because then we can shine a light on, like, what does it look like to come back from that? And also, so much of my research is in men's issues. And the way boys are socialized, you're expected to have all the answers. You're expected to never need help. You're expected to always be in control. But none of that is real. None of that is natural to the way we humans interact and survive in the world and live in the world. So I think it's super important when you're writing for boys in particular, and boy characters, to watch them sort of recognize their struggles and recognize that there's value in seeking help.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's super important. And I appreciate how much your book did that. And I know for me, even just as an adult reader and writer, I feel like I hadn't read a boy character like Brett, like who you created. And so I think that's something that will be we'll see the impact of that, right, among readers. So it's
I hope so.
Very important. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my second question is, many aspiring writers want to know how, where, and when the idea of a novel first starts, and at what point an idea begins to take the shape of a whole book, right? Like where does a book even start? Now, for anyone who has started to read your books or open them, right, we do get we do find out, right? We know a little bit of the background of what inspired you, but for those who have not had that chance, I would love for you to tell us what inspired each of your novels, and was there a particular moment that propelled you to write it? And Josh, can I start with you?
Sure, yeah. I often describe this book as a fun book about grief. To me, that was like a magic trick. Like, can I make this book palatable? This book about a really tough subject matter palatable by making it, sort of fun. But it was born out of my own grief. I was experiencing really painful grief, probably the worst spell I've ever experienced in my life. And this is so bizarre, but I was in my mid 30s, and I would lay. I had a trampoline in the backyard, one of those big trampolines, and I had been like, it was my favorite kind of exercise that I would use for years. And I would just like lay under the stars, and like that was a good place for me to like be alone in my feelings and process grief. And so the book sort of started there, and of course, there's that connection to the title. And I just imagined, like a 16-year-old kid out on his trampoline, feeling his feelings, not knowing what to do about them. And also, how watching in my own life, how that grief was escalating a bigger problem that had been going on for a long time, which was an eating disorder that I had not addressed, that I had not sought help for, that I had barely begun to acknowledge. But I was watching that behavior, or those behaviors escalate and sort of shift into new places. And I could tell that that was related, to the grief. So it was sort of the impetus of the story was sort of trying to understand my own experience that I was going through at that moment in my life, and to be able to be more compassionate towards myself, because that was hard to do when you're kind of in a rock bottom place. But it was really, really easy to be compassionate to a 16-year-old kid who was kind of going through similar things. And that helped me to learn to be more compassionate towards myself, which was necessary really in my healing process.
Yeah. Wow, I love how the idea, just knowing that the process of writing the book also had such an impact, a positive impact on you. I also love knowing that the trampoline is real.
Yeah, in Nevada, in my Nevada house, there's been that trampoline in the backyard for a few decades.
Now, then maybe the most important question I have for you is, did you extreme air drum while on the trampoline?
That was so like that was my thing, and I like had my tricks, and it was like in my head it was like a sport, and I was competing, and it just showed up in my book because that's how those things in our life do. They just sort of find their way into our writing.
That makes me so happy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Elvira, can you share at what point, what propelled you to write the book?
Yeah, I definitely know that moment when I started thinking about writing the book, because I write about it in the book. When that moment just came to mind, the idea of writing the book came to mind. I had been sent to juvenile hall when I was 16. And I remember in that moment, I just felt very alone in my experience. There was a lot happening at home and then in my community that it definitely made me feel like I must be, the only one feeling these things, even though other people are experiencing it. It just felt very real. And so when I was sent to juvenile hall, I met other young girls who also had experienced similar things and felt similar in similar ways. That moment made me think, well, maybe there are other people out in the world who feel that way and they're not alone. And how do I tell these other young girls that we're not alone? And for whatever reason, I hadn't read a book outside of school, and I wasn't exposed to literary so much. I just had an idea, like, what if I write a book? I don't know how to write a book, but I did love writing. I wrote in my journal every day since I was 7. And I had met an author. Yeah, I had met an author in 7th grade who visited my school and told us a little bit about her story and, how she overcame obstacles. So I remember that author and thinking, well, now all of us know her story. And what if I write a book? So I started writing it in juvenile hall. And that's kind of how the book became what it is, and obviously a lot more after that. But that's how the idea came about, and I just stuck to it. And that was my mission for 14 years.
Wow. Yeah, I really love that moment in the book too, and how it's when and Christy's feeling so alone, but also this like burning feeling that writing the book would also help tell their stories. And so it's just such a beautiful moment. And thank you for sharing that, just that memory of the author visiting your school. I'm sure I can imagine how when you do school visits, maybe that's something you really think of, right? Like, that can change lives. And that's just so amazing. Thank you. Patrick, how about you?
Yeah. First, thanks, Elvira. That's such an inspiring story. And also to think, wow, just there aren't a lot of incarceration, like juvenile hall. Like, there aren't a lot of these stories out there. And I guess that's the reason that I wrote No Going Back is, wow, I just am not seeing these kids. I got to go to an author visit at this place called Echo Glen Children's Center, which is a prison for kids really close to where I grew up. And when I was there, I just had this feeling that I had to write a book about these kids because maybe a decade before that, I was asked to teach a improv drama class in that same prison, youth prison. And then a couple decades before that, I was a kid growing up very close to that same prison. And we would tell stories about the kids escaping and just all of our fears. And it was just extremely dehumanizing, And so having those experiences in that prison, and then I have a father-in-law who's a psychiatrist, and he worked in a mental health ward where the kids were locked up similarly to prison. And I guess this isn't about the specific story, but it was about the need to, as an author, I had this opportunity to bring a character to life in a 360-degree way when I had seen them and been a part of two-dimensionalizing them. Yeah. So that's where it's all about. And then in my research, I read a story about a young woman who ended up there for a few years, and her story was kind of the story of the crime I stole for the book itself. She was a girl who was, she and her sisters were kind of starving, being raised by a single dad who was dealing drugs to kind of stay afoot, and to feed herself and her sisters, they stole her dad's supplier, and she ended up in that prison for a long time. And I just feel like that was the last thing that she ever needed, and her siblings didn't need her to be put away. So it was just important for me to tell one of these stories. And Elvira, I'm glad you did too. And that it was your own story. Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow. Thank you. That's it makes me want to I'm going to go back and reread parts as well, because just knowing the background just gives it so much more life. So that's amazing. Thank you. So next question, something I really appreciated was how telling one's life story. This is a theme that we see come up in each of the protagonists' journey. In other words, this idea that there's this true, authentic version that we get to tell once all these pieces fall into place. And each book beautifully captures ways in which the characters try and then stumble and then try again, right? To tell that truest, most empowering, authentic life story. So in Hurdles in the Dark, Christy, as you mentioned, has kept a journal since she was 7. And that journal allows her to document her life. And then later, it's what helped provide the material for you, right, to write this beautiful book, this incredible story about resilience. And it's also true for Brett, who creates a parallel life through Kid Condor, his comic that he secretly plants throughout the school, which makes for some hilarious scenes. I'm just laughing thinking about some of the lines, but I'm not going to give them away for those who have not read the book. And while Antonio, in his 3 days outside of Zephyr Woods Juvenile Detention Center, clearly does not have the time to put pen to paper, it's still important to him, right? So telling his story, all of it in his words, proves to be this very significant part of his journey. But each character must confront literal and figurative hurdles before they're ready to tell that story. So could you each speak to this, the importance of telling one's truest, most authentic story? How did that theme evolve throughout the writing and revising of the book? And Elvira, can I start with you on this one?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Because again, it is a memoir, but often you wonder, like, how much do authors really reveal about specific situations, right? And for me, I often remember, like, I got to tell the story as authentic as possible, and that's why I kept the journals and used the journals to tell the story and get into my young adult perspective and point of view. But definitely, there was a time where I was like, oh, I don't want to write about this, and I don't want to tell people what happened about this specific situation. And there was a lot of shame around this topic. And I mentioned in the author's note about, I had written the book without a specific situation, because again, there was a lot of shame and guilt. But then the more research that I made, and I talked to other people who have been impacted by similar situations, they're like, Elvira, you have an opportunity to speak on those issues, but also make sure that other young people feel heard and seen. So, I maybe 6 months before the final editorial process, I'm like, screw this, I'm just gonna write that part in.
Wow.
So yeah, but I wrestled a lot with it for so many years. The story would have been very different if I wrote it from my adult perspective looking back. So yeah, it was really important to stay authentic, and I'm so happy that I did, because I'm sure all the authors also get similar things on Instagram and on your websites, young people coming up to you or messaging you like, thank you so much for talking about this, because it's helped me feel heard and feel seen. And I've also experienced this too. So yeah, it's very important. I see them.
Yeah. Oh, yes, the comment. Yeah, this is no, you're absolutely right. And I'm so happy you kept everything, everything that you did, that you kept it in. It is this very raw, beautiful memoir with like very difficult moments. But I think it's so, so hugely important. And, as we all know, as authors, we know that books change lives, and adding in just all of these very vulnerable moments, right, where you are telling, your full story. They're just so important for young readers. So thank you for that. Patrick, how about you?
The telling of the story, well, it is in first person, but also I guess the important aspect of him telling his story is the poetry that tells his backstory. Antonio writes he's encouraged to write his stories out when he's in prison. He does have an encouraging and helpful teacher when he's there. And there's weird stuff that happens in the creative process where sometimes you do things backwards, and you out of a creative structural thing, you put something there, and then that ends up revealing something that's actually gets to the heart of the story. But I tried at some point, my editor had asked if I could rewrite my previous book and as a novel in verse, and it didn't happen. And then I thought, I'm going to write her a novel in verse. And so for years and years, I tried to write this story that had kind of a backstory and a front story that was sort of action oriented. And it was all in verse. And there was just like this breaking point right in the middle. It's like, bonk, this does not transition well at all. So I'm like, okay, maybe I write the weekend story in prose, and his backstory is all in these little poems that show up. And as that structural change happened, the life of those poems became deeper and more rooted in who he was. And all of a sudden you saw the connection between the decisions he was making in his present. You could connect them to these pieces from his past. Yeah. And so that functional attempt over the years and years and years it takes me to write a novel is, in the end, it's all worth it, because you just out of necessity figured out this thing that ended up making the piece so much richer. So I don't know if that's an answer to the question.
No, it
but,
is, absolutely. And now that you
Yeah.
bring that up, how many years would you say you spent on this novel?
Yeah, I'm just a struggling writer and reader for that matter. So my first novel took me 9 years. I had no idea what I was, or 8 years. It took me 8 years. And the second one, after I figured it out, that one took me 9 years, a year longer. And then I pared it back down to a nice 8 years for the third book. All of these overlap kind of. So it hasn't been the 30 years or whatever, but but I'm really slow. I have to make a ton of mistakes. I have to do a ton of revision. I have to have people who read my novel look at me with question marks like written all over their face. Like, what are you even trying to do here? Like, I have to go through that process before I figure out what
But
the
that's
thing
your
is going to be.
process.
It turns
right?
out
And
that's what it is. I always like convince
Yeah.
myself this one's going to be fast. And then I'm like, wait, this is my story now. This is who I am. This is the way it's going to go.
But I think that's inspiring as well. And I think it's inspiring for everyone, for readers, for writers, also just to know that every book has its own life, right? And sometimes some people write a book in a year, some people take 9 years, but it's almost like every book just takes the time it needs. And you know, and look what a beautiful book that came out. So
I'm really
I wouldn't
proud
say
of
it like
all
a bad
these.
thing.
I'm really proud of all these, but but Jason Reynolds is Jason Reynolds, and I'm not unfortunately Jason Reynolds, and I am the 8-year guy.
Well, you know, the world needs, you know, all kinds of beautiful books with
That's
beautiful
right.
background stories.
That's
So
right.
Josh, how about you?
I think the impetus for Kid Condor and this comic book world, it is sort of linked into that genesis of the book, where I'm looking at the stars and I'm making up these constellations of my own, because I have a rudimentary knowledge in astronomy, but it's like not, it's not great. But I was seeing I was making up my own figures in the sky. And there was, Daddy Condor and Baby Condor, who was flying safely under Daddy's wing. And, eventually that became Captain Condor and Kid Condor. And it was, initially what I think was so useful about this was it's an age appropriate medium for Brett to try to understand his past and some of the trauma that he's been through. He's not really ready to articulate that, though, but I want readers to have some hints at it. So as we get to know Kid Condor and Captain Condor and this whole Constellation Core universe, and we start to get these little details about his past, we start to see the parallels there. And I think so many of us in real life who have struggled with trauma, and especially unprocessed trauma, one of the ways that you try to manage that, carrying that with you, is that it's coming out in these creative endeavors, in your artwork and your writing, and these different ways, and you never fully understand it, but it's a sense of control, and it's a sense of distance also from it. So on the one hand, Brett is facing his trauma to some small degree, but from his past, but he's also really avoiding the truth of the story. And of course, there comes this point in the book as well where he is tasked with writing a personal essay, and he's a really good student. He's the type who shows up and gets good grades and whatever. But for whatever reason, this project, he can't do it, right? And he's wasting time, and he's writing rough drafts that get thrown in the trash. And I think there's a little comedy in that for the reader, and also some more, sort of like breadcrumbs, right, as we get ready for learning more about his past. But I think that it, to me, is such a fun contrast, right? You have this fantastical world that Brett has used to escape his reality, and then you have this real world activity he has to do for school that's pushing him, just like other circumstances in his life right now are pushing him to face what he's struggling to face, both the trauma of his moment right now and of his past. And so that creates that important question in the reader's mind, do I believe that Brett's going to get there? Will there be the point where Brett speaks really directly about what has happened to him in the past and what's happening to him right now? And that's a way to create a little, just a little bit of tension too, right? In a book that is kind of, in my mind, more of a character-driven literary type of story, where does that tension come from, right? When you don't have a lot of outward conflict sources, and a lot of that has to do with that inner turmoil in Brett. Like, can I be more honest in my creative work? And that we'll see, right? You got to read it and find out.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I love how beautifully the really important pieces of information are revealed and slowly, and how intentional, of course, it all was, like what was revealed. I love that. I don't know about, I know that Evelyn is his adoptive mother, but I don't know, we don't know anything about his biological mother until much later. And I just love how you weave in those different parts of the story. And then, like you say, his understanding and his approach to Kid Condor, the comic book, it begins to change as he learns more about himself. So I really love that. And just a follow-up question for you, Kid Condor, the actual comic book, was that there at the very beginning, like when you were writing this book, or was that at what point did that become a really central part of his story?
Yeah, I would say it was. I can't remember if it was there on like day one, but maybe by day three, right? It was really,
Okay.
really early in the process. And part of that was because I was thinking about like, okay, an eating disorder, there's like myriad factors that are coming together to sort of push someone towards that behavior and that illness. And one of the factors I wanted to write about was male standards for beauty, and what our society is teaching boys that we're looking for from them. And in all the media they're consuming, especially in those teenage years, it's these gigantic superhero franchises, and those are really fun, but they're also not doing a great job of showing boys what a typical male body might look like.
Yeah.
And of course, they see typical male bodies everywhere they look, but these aren't the bodies that we are exalting and putting up on a pedestal. So between the action films, superhero films, all of this male-centric media, the messaging is really unrealistic. And for Brett, there's something about really interesting to me about, I am Kid Condor. Kid Condor is me. But as I'm aging and as my body's changing, I'm starting to question, am I Kid Condor? I don't know. I don't look like this. I don't look like this kid anymore. His body is very different from the way my body is changing in a lot of ways. And how am I going to face that? How am I going to make sense and reconcile that? And to, just obviously to recognize that the body doesn't make Kid Condor super. And there are some interesting ways we see that play out towards the end of the book when we think about one of the newer characters he's writing into the comic at some point. But I'll leave that up to the reader to find.
Yeah, don't give it away. Thank you so much for that. So next question is all about families, found family, and some of the support people that are in the lives of our protagonists. So they say that every family is a whole universe, and that is especially true for our protagonists, from parents struggling with their own traumas to those caught in cycles of violence and also responsible for inflicting pain. Fiction and real life are full of examples of what we call imperfect parents, right? And young people who are forced to step up and just carry a lot on their shoulders. But within many families and cultures, there's this idea of like, no se puede hablar de eso, right? Like, we can't talk about that. So Josh and Patrick, while your novels are not memoirs, I think the family situations that Brett and Antonio find themselves in will really resonate true with many young readers. And so this is a question for all three of you. What advice would you give a young writer who wants to write about difficult topics, maybe inspired by their own family history and experiences, but are feeling some resistance toward that, either internal resistance or actual resistance, from others? And Elvira, can we start with you?
Oh yeah, definitely pick the person who had to write about the real life people. Yes, definitely. It was really tough. It was challenging. Yeah, it was very, very tough writing about this. But I think back to the journaling aspect and doing that while I was journaling, right? Like the people around me, what's going on with them? Why are they behaving this way? I think what I learned about that process was, everyone was trying to survive in that environment that I grew up in, and it helped me understand why they were doing the things that they were doing, whether it was healthy or unhealthy. And I definitely encourage young people to write about their experiences, their family. I actually think that would help understand why the people around you are doing the things they do, right? Often when we're kids, we're like, I hate our parents, and I hear that often from, I coach track and field, and some kids would tell me that. I'm like, well, what's going on? And so I definitely encourage young people to write about it, journal about it, but also sometimes you learn some things that are really hard to embrace. And I encourage people to seek help or support groups or talk to your friends, because it can be really, really hard. But I think overall, I think you could definitely learn a lot about people, but about yourself, certainly.
Yeah. Wow. That's such great advice. I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, just that idea that writing about it, whether you want to publish it or not, just sort of like processing those feelings in writing helps give you perspective. And I would say also, just understand your situation and the world around you. So thank you for bringing that up. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I grew up gay in the 90s. And for younger viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with that time period, it was incredibly inhospitable for gay kids, queer kids of any kind. And I became very internalized and very lonely. And my friends, I stopped having deep, meaningful friendships because I was struggling to be vulnerable with people. If people knew me too well, they would find out this thing that I was trying to hide, or that I had been taught to be ashamed of. And what was so revolutionary for me about writing was suddenly I felt like I had a voice, even if it was just me in the journal and the ether or whatever. That I had somebody to express myself to and to be my true, honest self with. And when I found my tribe of weirdos, which was, this group of writers in the area where I grew up, who were all sort of obsessed with this college professor who taught creative writing at a community college. And her name was Marilee Swerzik, a wonderful woman that was loved in the community. And as luck would have it, like my life path just sort of brought me into that group. And suddenly Marilee saw me, right? And saw me for who I was. And pretty soon other people were, and pretty soon I was valuing myself in a different way. And all of this like sort of preamble is simply leading up to, you have to seek out your particular weirdos. You have to seek out people who are open to the truth and open to, your vulnerability and your story. For years, I didn't have that with my family, even after I had become a writer. But it was okay. And I was able to survive that and begin to really thrive because I was able to find it elsewhere. So kind of if you may want to write about things that are challenging where your family are concerned, but that doesn't mean your family has to look at it. That doesn't mean you have to share it with your family. But if you share with others, it's like really, really empowering. And there may come a day, and obviously it has for me because I'm sitting here talking to you. There may come a day where like you're ready to have your work out there in the world, and you don't get to control who sees it, and that may be uncomfortable. But often over those years and doing that work, you can build up to that. You don't have to feel ready for that today. If you're 17, let's say, and you can't imagine a day would come where you could share your writing with your family. That's perfectly fine to feel that way right now, but keep writing anyway, because that can change.
I love that. And also I wrote down tribe of weirdos. I'm going to hold on to that. I think that's so important. It makes me feel better just being, I hope I'm a weirdo to someone in that very
Yeah.
positive, creative, wonderful way.
Yeah.
Patrick, how about you? What advice would you give young writers who, are feeling some resistance about writing on difficult topics?
Yeah, I think to get back to the family as a topic, I think when kids are in the midst of loving and battling and negotiating with their own families, they have difficulty having that perspective that you have a little bit later when you can stand back and look at that whole situation from a little bit of a distance. And so if you're if you're a kid and you're in the midst of your family situation, I, as somebody who's old and has lived through these things and had my family seep into my stories every which way, I just want you to know that 100% your story has value. The craziness in your family may be annoying to you, maybe a struggle for you, but there are incredible stories in your family, in those struggles. And just everybody who opens themselves up to stories in their families and their friendships and their communities has stories to draw from that are totally worthy, totally of valuable value, and people will be drawn to the stories that you want to tell.
Awesome. Thank you. And that's actually a great segue into the next question, which was about some of the supporting cast. So some of the other characters that help our protagonists along the way. And that really resonates with me, what you said about how everyone has this incredible story, right? And we see in each of the stories, Christy, Brett, and Antonio must search and find within themselves this, of course, this incredible strength, but they also rely on community of friends and found family to thrive. And I would love to know, were these supporting characters always part of the story you wanted to tell? How did they evolve over the course of your writing and revision process? And Patrick, can we actually start with you?
Sure. I think the found family is Antonio's friends, Gary Jr. and Maya, who he struggles with, both of them on his return. But they're also his mother's new partner, who is just a surprising source of support for him, but also a lady that owns the donut shop. And this is something that happens in writing where all three of my books are set in the same place. And I'm like, oh, I want to put this donut shop in the book. So it was all about the donut shop. And then it's like, well, who works in the donut shop? And then it's like, well, how often do they go to the donut shop? And pretty soon, this character of the owner of the donut shop comes to life, and she's somebody who wasn't able to have children, and she's someone who's the age of their that could be their grandmother, and she's somebody that lived a very rough life on her way to becoming a very successful business owner. And who is this person gonna seek out but the rough kids who can stand in for her, for the grandchildren that she didn't have? So to answer the question, I had no idea she was going to be in the story, but she just grew out of the place where I set the book. And those surprises happen in every fiction writing process. And it's just a joy to watch those things happen. And it's also about just trusting that those things will happen along the way if you keep on writing and you're sort of true to the place that you're writing about and the characters that you're writing about.
Yeah, I love knowing that because she's such an important part of the story. And
she became really big.
Yeah, to know that didn't come till later. And actually, fun fact, I'm not even the biggest fan of donuts, but just reading those scenes, there's a donut place near me. And I was like, you know what? I'm craving this donut. So I took my computer and I was reading through the book and enjoying a donut. And it just, yeah. Anyway, so your book inspired me to eat a donut while reading. So, but that just shows, it's such, those scenes are so important. They're such a huge part of the book.
Yeah. And if I can inspire more people to eat donuts, I'm just going to keep on.
Then you won. Yes. Josh, how about you? Some incredible supporting characters in your book. Can you talk a little bit about how they came to be?
Yeah. Reed started out, his best friend, and who he's actually living with now because of some unfortunate circumstances he's going through. I needed to write about a best friend relationship that I had with one of my very best writing friends, and recognizing some symptoms of like envy that were coming up within me in this friendship, and that I could start to feel like, I think this is going to harm my friendship with this guy if I'm not more mindful, right, about like, where are these insecurities coming up within me? And so in some ways Reed is providing that for Brett, and was kind of initially for me just an opportunity to sort of work through some of my own feelings around that, while also being able to really acknowledge how important that friendship was to me, how important it is to have somebody who, you call your brother, who you love that much. And with Mallory, the other character that I think is always so important to talk about, she ends up kind of taking Brett under her wing and acting as a mentor to him. And I find her very generous for doing that. She has this really full life of her own. She has a lot of creative endeavors she's after, but she sees something Brett can't see because of the way women are socialized. She understands Brett's circumstances, what's going on with his eating disorder, long before he does. And she sees an opportunity there to mentor him. And, when I think about writing for boys, one of the things I wanted to try to achieve here is simply normalizing having women mentors. I've had female mentors as an educator, as a Montessorian, as an artist, as a writer, my entire life. And they weren't just making me better at those endeavors, but they were making me a better human being, right? And they were helping me either hold on to or reclaim aspects of my makeup that, patriarchy would try to condition and police out of me, and at times was succeeding. I have always been a toxic overachiever. I have always been toxically self-reliant. I've never looked like a toxic male figure, and yet patriarchy, it works in really subtle ways. And I think being really open to being mentored by women is like super, super handy for any boy or man. Anyone should be so lucky.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, super, super important. And I had not thought of just hearing you talk about that. I hadn't thought about that aspect, right? Just the importance of showing that relationship that he ends up learning so much from Mallory, who is such an amazing character. I love reading Mallory, and also Reed. Like, just they really just came to life. So thank you for that.
They're fun people. And when your protagonist is really suffering a lot and going through some dark things, like, one of the easiest ways to bring in the light is like, okay, who are the lights in his life, and give them screen time or page time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Such a good, for everyone listening, that is such a good craft point. No, that's not the word.
Yeah.
Craft advice. So Elvira, how about you? I know, Hurdles in the Dark, it's a memoir, but still, as a writer, you are choosing who to bring to life more, right? And so I would love to hear what that process was like for you, the supportive characters, how, what's the background, but I'm not saying that right. How did they come to be? How did you make those choices?
Yeah, I think for me it was situational. For example, what comes to mind, and it's kind of similar to what you guys are saying. A character that comes to mind is Linda. And, long story short, my mother was held for ransom. She was kidnapped, and I had 24 hours to come up with the $40,000. And if you know a little bit of background about my family and my childhood, there was not a lot of resources and money going around where I can easily go ask for that money. And so I remember the moment thinking, I'm going to have to raise some money myself as a 14-year-old. And who can I lean on? And I did feel alone in that moment. Like, oh my God, I don't think I can contact anybody. But I did. I contacted Linda, and Linda showed up without any hesitation and said, let's do this. We're going to go and raise the money within 24 hours. And though she only was in the book within that time frame, she made a big impact in my life, knowing that like in the moment when you feel alone, the people that you least expect to come out, and help, it was her. And so, so I think about her and just her ability to just there for me when I felt alone, but also my friends. I mentioned that also, that my friends who were 14 years old, who grew up in lower income communities, they showed up and said, we're going to try to help you raise the ransom. So yeah.
Wow, that's all. Yeah, when the moments when Linda appeared, I was literally cheering. I was like, how is this real? This is fiction. No, it's not. It's a memoir. So it is this like really amazing, amazing moment. And it's incredible. We won't give it away. But yeah, absolutely incredible. And thank you. And I also think about the other girls in juvenile hall, right? And just how they, even though it's not a long time that Christy, that Christy is with them, but just how they provide the source of strength as well, just through their stories. And even though, they don't get a ton of page time just because of, when we get to read about them, but they're such rich characters. You really, really bring them to life. And I think, the young teenage, Elvira Christie, I hope would be so proud of how you did bring their stories to life.
Thank you. That was my favorite characters to write, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Full of life, I loved it. It was really, really fun.
Awesome. And so, well, I know we're getting close to the near the end of the time. So of course, I do not want to get to Q&A before talking specifically about the importance of mental health in your novels for young people, right? In today's world. So each story portrays young people's struggles with mental health and also breaking harmful cycles. As a teacher, I especially appreciate the discussion of young people's access to mental health services. And I really appreciate how different we see it play out in each of these novels. And, unfortunately, young people don't always get the help they want. For Christy, she wants help. She literally begs her mom for it in this really heartbreaking scene. For Brett, he experiences, Josh, as you talked about, that personal resistance, right? Based on his own ideas on what boys should and should not do. And shout out to Mallory for helping him break down those stereotypes. And for Antonio, support meetings bring up a lot of baggage around the idea of forgiveness. And I would love to hear from each of you. Can you speak to what you hope young readers will take away from reading about your character's struggles and experiences with mental health and access to services? So Patrick, can we start with you talking about Antonio?
Yeah, I guess in prison, Antonio does get counseling on a regular basis. He also gets access to AA, and I included the A in there because it's really complicated, because it's a tremendous support to a lot of, and help for a lot of people, and I want to acknowledge that. But there's also a lot of judgment that's put on people. That's like, this isn't necessarily a disease, it's a failing that we're going to work on here. Yeah. And I think I've seen that a lot as well, just as a school teacher, in teaching in middle school, where the problem when students are really struggling, the problem is often them and the choices that they make, not that 13-year-old's greater context at all the responsibility for the change, because that's all we as teachers and administrators really have access to, is the person. But then all the weight can bear down on you, just like it does with AA for some people, where it's like, this is all me, I have to change, I'm at fault, I'm the one. And I think that's the reason why I wanted to sort of work to process that a little bit, because in the end, I think you see, wow, Antonio's a pretty good kid. He's trying really hard. He's struggling. It's just context. If we could change his context, a lot of these issues just wouldn't be there. The stressors that bear down and enhance mental health issues, when you get rid of those stressors, sometimes those issues are things that you can actually deal with. So anyway, that's one of the, I guess, big messages of the book, that I hope provides some sense of comfort, that it's not all you. It's not you. It's not up to you to work your way out of this alone.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
that is certainly a very powerful and clear message in the book. Thank you. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, beyond the message that it's always okay to ask for help, I wanted to really underscore that, an eating disorder is a really, really serious illness, and young people, and especially boys who might be treated in ways where they think, I have to be able to handle everything myself. I wanted to undermine those ideas, that professionals matter, and this is the type of illness that requires professional attention, because it's extremely dangerous, and that I, as an adult experiencing it, was not equipped to heal on my own, and I was very lucky to have an incredible treatment team, and that was absolutely life-changing. It was like brain rewiring. It was incredible for me. And I would want that for anyone suffering in these situations. So yeah, a big message in my mind is professionals they end up in those roles because they've worked really hard for them, and there's something there that for us that we can take from them if we're fortunate enough to be able to, even have access. And I certainly hope that most people do through school environments, at least young people.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Elvira?
I would say that, if I can give my young adult advice, I would say that it's okay not to be okay, and to seek out support, whether that's friends, online groups, counselors. Yeah, I definitely would say that's like the main thing. Like, it's okay not to be okay, and those emotions might seem very intense, but know that those emotions are not going to stay like that forever, right? We go ups and downs, So just reminding yourself that you're going to be okay. Might not feel like you're okay now, but I promise you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So that's the only message I would say. And also, I do write extensively about this in the back of my book, in the afterword. So also, if you guys want to check that out, please feel free. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, like my own drafts, I overwrite, and I have like 10 more questions. So I hope we can take this conversation somewhere else at a later time, because I do truly want to know the answers to them. But I know we have many participants here that have questions. So I would love to turn it over to the Q&A now. So the first question is from Erica. Did you all keep journals growing up? Have you always enjoyed writing? What a great question. Let's see. Let's start with you, Elvira.
Yeah, I started writing when I was 7, and it was, it was helpful for me to sort through my feelings. And I've kept a lot of those journals, and everywhere I go, and I've always had them with me because of the book too, right? I held them really dearly. But yeah, that's how I started writing journals, and I've always kept them. Still journal to this day.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Thank you. How about you, Josh?
I didn't do any journaling until I was a teen, and I actually wrote a lot of poetry in journals. And I was so afraid that people would find them that when I moved once, I actually took them to the landfill. They're somewhere in the landfill. I regret it so much, but there was just that some of the stuff I wrote as a teenager, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't let this get out into the world. So the aliens of the future one day will unearth them. They'll have a good time.
Wow.
That's all. I'm like picturing that. Like, you need to please write that story. Just the scene of a boy going to the landfill. And
Yeah,
like,
finding his
powerful.
nose. Please.
Parents cannot discover this. Friends cannot discover this. I've been too vulnerable.
Yes. Awesome. How about you, Patrick?
I definitely didn't keep journals, and I wish I could or did, but I didn't. And I didn't really come to writing till college as a theater major. I took a playwriting class, and that was the thing that did it. So it was much later.
Well, it just shows it's never too late.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. We have time for one more question. So the next question, are there any books you wish you had been around? I'm sorry, any books you wish had been around when you were teens? I love this question. Patrick, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there's something about modern YA that really connects to just real normal people. I read a couple Matt de la Peña books as I was like starting to work with some struggling readers years ago, and I was just like, oh my God, I struggled so much with reading, but I was like, I would have read these books. These books just hook me, and I cannot stop reading them. And it would have been the same, even more so for me if I could have picked those up when I was 12 or 13 years old. It would have made a huge difference for me, just to hear about that. Just a very real family, very real background, very real city. The settings are really gritty. I would have totally dug it, and the sports angle would have helped me too in those books. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. How about you, Josh?
Yeah, I just think about some of these queer narratives for young people.
Mm-hmm.
Think about David Levithan, and I think about like Adam Silvera, and how lucky I would have been to read some of those. And I felt lucky to read them as an adult, and I felt that gave me a lot more courage in my own writing to realize like, hey, the world's ready for these kind of challenging stories, and stories that represent all different types of people, which was just something we weren't quite seeing terribly often back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. How about you, Elvira?
I don't have a particular book in mind because I've been reading lots of books lately, young adult books around mental health. And I just wish all these books were around when I was a kid and I was exposed to it. As I mentioned, I didn't read growing up. And the books that I did have at school, I didn't feel like they represented my own experiences. And so that idea of writing the book when I was 16 was because of that. But I'm really happy that I'm seeing, the young adult space really dive into the mental health, and it's truly amazing. And I'm very, very grateful that I'm also part of that.
Yeah, that's so, yes. Well, I'll answer that question because I would have loved to have read all of your books when I was a teen, middle school, a teen, because I just love how, among all the just amazing topics that are covered, each of your books straddle, just different worlds, either identities, whether it's heritage, right? But it's also Elvira and Hurdles in the Dark. It's also neighborhoods and place and how they feel like such different worlds. And Christie's, kind of navigating how, who she wants to be in those spaces. And so I'm so happy that kids today have them. But we are going to end there. Elvira, Josh, Patrick, your books were so real to me. I think I shared that when I was connecting with you on email. I actually wrote, "Hi, Christy, Brett, and Antonio," because your characters were so real. And I had to delete it. I also, when I first printed questions for myself, I wrote your protagonist name. So that's how real it was. So I can't wait to hear just the impact that your books have on young readers today. So thank you everyone for attending the Hella Complicated panel of the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. This is truly a pleasure, and I can't wait to connect more. So
awesome.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Thank you.